are here in section 1.7, and we just finished two sections. 1.5 dealing with adding and positive and negative numbers. It was titled Real Numbers because we didn't stop at just positive and negative integers. We looked at rationals, decimals, all that, and then eventually threw in variables as well. Then we followed that up with section 1.6 where we subtracted, and we discovered that subtraction is really the same as adding, the opposite. So we're able to use our addition signs, our addition rules for subtraction once we change the subtraction to adding. So let's just review that real quick at the beginning before we start multiplying and dividing real numbers, which means we're going to be multiplying and dividing positives and negative counting numbers, whole numbers, integers, which is where you get the negatives involved, fractions, rationals, decimals, potentially irrationals. We're going to involve variables here soon, so multiplying and dividing. But let's review really quickly. As we recall from 1.5 and 1.6, the rules for adding and subtracting are the same if you've already changed subtraction to addition. So you change the subtraction to addition, and then you change the second sign, or the sign of the second number of the two things that you're adding. And what we looked at is if they're the same signs, positive plus positive, or negative plus negative. This is a review. We did this all in our notes earlier as well. Then you're going to add, the little reminder word is sum, same and sum, very similar sounding here. You're going to add the two numbers, and you're going to keep the bigger sign, and I put bigger in quotes because it's the same sign on both numbers, so you just keep that sign. But we write it as keep the bigger sign because then it makes more sense when the signs are different. You still keep that bigger sign. So you really just have to memorize that rule, that one rule. You don't have to keep track of which one's bigger, which one's not. On the different signs, if you have like a positive plus a negative or a negative plus a positive, the fact that they're different kind of makes us think of that word difference. And when you find the difference of something, that means you're going to subtract the two numbers. Difference means to subtract. And we will keep the bigger sign. We did lots and lots of examples in the last couple of sections. But now let's look at multiplication and division. The fun thing about multiplication division, kind of the little break that's offered here, is there's no changes needed. It's the same rules for multiplication as it is for division. There's no changes. You don't have to do anything to be able to multiply and divide positive and negative numbers. There's no changing subtraction to addition. There's no changing division to multiplication. You can if you want to. In fact, all division really is multiplying by the reciprocal or the inverse. But there's no changes needed here. It's the same steps for both multiplying and dividing. And here's what those steps are. Here's what the rules are. If you have same signs, again, we're going to look at the situations are either they're the same signs or different signs. Same thing with multiplications and division. Same signs, different signs. What you have to keep straight here is what do you do if you're adding and subtracting? What do you do if you're multiplying and dividing? Okay? So this is a chance for you to really get a handle on, really understand, dare I say, memorize these rules, because it's going to matter. You can't just go, oh, there was something about the same, and oh, that means it's always positive, or I have to keep the bigger, or whatever. You have to keep track of, if you're adding and subtracting, here's the rules up here in pink and blue. You add, same signs, keep the bigger sign. If you're adding and subtracting, you find the difference, and then you keep, and the signs are different, you find the difference and keep the bigger sign. When you're multiplying and dividing, there's a little bit different rule, but you still look at whether the signs are same or different. So we're still looking for situations like positive times a positive, or negative times a negative, or positive divided by a positive, or negative divided by a negative. It might look like you know, negative divided by negative, or positive over positive. Those also mean division. So watch for that as well. It means division. You perform the operation, whether it's multiplication or division, which means you multiply or divide, and your answer is positive. For different signs, so it would be like positive times negative, negative times positive, positive divided by a negative, which would look like positive over negative, or if you had negative divided by positive, which would be a negative over a positive. All those are different signs. And same idea, you perform the operation, only this time your answer is negative. Okay. So this section will have you work on multiplication and division. Same signs, positive. Different signs, negative. It's just a matter of repeat and memorize. What tends to be the catch and the holdup is when the adding and subtracting and multiplication and division are all kind of mixed up. For example, the exam, right? You're going to have to separate out what rule goes with which. So whatever it takes for you to memorize something, rehearsing it out loud, writing it out, telling somebody, explaining it to somebody else, multiple practice problems, whatever it takes, you need to get it memorized so that you don't start swapping these rules, okay? The same sign positive, different signs negative answer only applies to multiplication and division. For adding and subtracting, you still have to decide which operation to use based on what you're starting with. Same signs you add, different signs you subtract. You always keep the bigger sign, okay, for adding and subtracting. All right, so I'll get off my little soapbox here. Sometimes a question about why. The book talks about the multiplication as a repeated addition, so and which is a great way to describe it. So if you're doing a positive times a positive, you're adding up those numbers that many more times. So it's a way to quickly add something. Instead of adding 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3, you could say 4 times 3, meaning 4 groups of 3, and it's a quicker way to add up those 3's. Well, if you're adding a bunch of positives, your result is going to be positive. If you're taking away, a negative would represent a takeaway, taking away a bunch of, let's go down here. If you're taking away a bunch of positives, well, your result is going to be lower than you were before, okay? If you're adding in a bunch of negatives, again, the result is going to be lower than it was before. But if you and negative times negative, so those two things I just described, adding in a bunch of negatives or taking away a bunch of positives, your result is lower than it was before, so that's why that answer is negative when the signs are different. But when the signs are the same and you have a negative times a negative, it's like you're taking away a bunch of negatives, like you're taking away a bunch of debt. When you do that, the end result is positive. The end result is you have less that you owe. Your balance has raised up, so that's why negative times a negative is a positive. That's one way to explain it. And we can talk about more ways in class or anything like that. Or separate tutoring, club time, whatever you want. Some of you, all you want is the rules and let me just get it memorized. Some of you, the why behind the rule is going to be critical, especially if you need to kind of help yourself come up with it on the spot in case you blank during the exam. So start to get to know who you are, what kind of learner, and how you need to best prepare for the test. So it's a good chance to reminder, since the book talks about this, it's a great time to remind you that skimming the book prior to watching the videos is a great thing. If you haven't done that yet, pause the video, take just a couple seconds and skim through 1.7 before you come back and watch these. It's also a great idea to skim or even read the pages thoroughly before you jump in to do the practice problems. The book often says things at least a little different, if not a lot different than me, and sometimes that other way of explaining it will help it click into place for you. Okay, so we're going to try some examples now down at the bottom of page 1. We will see you there.